Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to a quick review of Bride by Ali Hazelwood. What I want to do is give you a brief overview of the book's about, tell you the things that I like, and tell you the things that I didn't like, jumping straight into it. This is a new thing for me. This book came out less than 2 weeks ago. I read a book the month of release. This has never happened before. Ali Hazelwood is a very popular romance author. She normally does like science-y, STEM-related romance. This is her first foray into fantasy. And I've been reading a lot of fantasy, romance. It's all the rage these days. So I thought I'd get in on the ground floor and see what it's all about. So this book is about our main character, Misery, who is a vampire, and she has an arranged marriage with the alpha werewolf. This is set in the modern day in a society where like humans, werewolves, vampires, they all know of each other. They exist in our society, but there's drama and there's tension and there's politics. The vampires and werewolves don't get along, but what happens when they gotta get along? Ooh, and do they get along? Let me just tell you that. It is a romance after all. But I'll say this. Going into this book, I really didn't know what to expect, having not read of any of Ali Hazelwood's books before, but I know it was highly anticipated. So I really came in with no expectations. I wasn't expecting to like it, wasn't expecting to dislike it. And I'll say this, of all the fantasy romance books that I've read, I think the plot and I think the characters in this book are the tightest. I think they're some of the most intriguing plot lines that I've read in this romance subgenre, this flavor of fantasy. I think that this world, it's I don't know if this is going to be a standalone. It's going to be a series. I'm sure it's going to be fleshed out into a series because what fantasy romance doesn't branch out into 1,000 books? But the world feels lived in. I thought it was an interesting choice to be set in the modern day, and at first I didn't like that. I'm like, I was hoping for a period piece. I was hoping for gothic castles and cloaks and the vampire hoods that like go up to here, those ones. It's not that. It's more modern day, but she does a great job of establishing the history of this world, that these factions have existed in society and they know of each other, but there's tensions and there's a lot of politics. I think the politics are very intriguing. So this whole setup of like an arranged political marriage, it feels like, well, it obviously is a setup of the plot, but you understand there's lore as to why this would work, why this has been like, what's the inciting incident that leads to this thing. It feels like an established world that our character is living in and is a pawn in these wider politics. And it all just felt like a very well thought out story. And then we're going to get into the romance. It's kind of like exploring romance in this very established world, which a lot of times, like reading other fantasy romance books, it kind of feels like things are being made up as we go along. It's not fully thought out. You're just trying to tell this romance story, but you're just adding magic in it. This one was more so, this is a fantasy world, we're telling a romance story in it, and I think like how like the physiology, I guess, there's not really magic, but obviously like vampires and werewolves are like mythical creatures. You could definitely see Hazelwood's science-y background where she like tries to science-y explain vampires and werewolves and the things that happen, and there's a very specific example that happens later, but I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But one thing that she does very early is establish how her werewolves and how her vampires are different from what we assume. So like she'll like in the dialogue of the story, because she has these humans as characters, they'll be like, oh, so you're afraid of garlic, huh? And they'll be like, no, I'm not afraid of garlic, as a way of like setting up this world. Like it's vampires and werewolves as we know them, but there's slight twists, there's slight modifications, and she makes that all very clear. And it felt very deliberate, especially in that first act of like setting up like how this world works, which again, I thought was really well done, and I did appreciate it. And then the plot itself, obviously it's a romance, but there's politics, and there's kind of like a mystery. There's kind of an overarching goal that our character is trying to solve this mystery, and eventually obviously all the later characters in the romance all kind of gets wrapped up into this mystery, and it is intriguing and it evolves on itself. I think if you cut the romance out, you cut like the spicy scenes out, you cut the growing love for each other out, you still have a great fantasy, mystery, political kind of thriller going on here, which is another thing that you don't find often in fantasy romance. So the plot is very, very strong on its own. And throughout the whole thing, I was invested. I wanted to see how things ended up. And the romance, I would say as well, maybe some of the best romance that I've read, full stop. I enjoyed both of the characters. I think they were, although I would say maybe the guy, the werewolf, I feel like I don't understand everything that he's about, but their chemistry together I thought really worked, and I was invested in their relationship. But I'll say this, those are all positives. That's 5 minutes of positives. Let me just tell you something about myself. Extreme spice, if you know what I'm saying, the scenes of passion, let's just say that. It's not what I come here for. I do like a good romance. I do like a good heartwarming, like love, true love. They're meant to be, like, I like that kind of stuff. It's kind of why I read like a decent amount of romance, but like the real like intense stuff, I'm like, okay, take it or leave it. I see why people enjoy it, but like oftentimes I just kind of want to like, okay, like, let's move on, shall you? Make me a little bit uncomfortable. Like, do I have to be here watching you guys? That's how I feel about it. I would say some of the earlier spicy scenes, I was feeling it because I like these characters. I like the chemistry. I'm like, oh yeah, go for it, girl. As we get deeper in this book, the scenes get intense. They get extraordinarily intense. And as someone who is not their favorite part, it's borderline uncomfortable. Because let's just say, it's not human and human, all right? It gets a little funky with the physiology here, okay? And she is a science, so she knows exactly what would be going on in these characters' bodies. Let's just say that, okay? Let's keep it there. It's not like they're doing it when he's a wolf, okay? But it's not like it's not like that, okay? Let's just put that out there. It's not like he's not like that. But he's not like a wolf, okay? But he's not, okay? Let's just say that. It gets weird, it gets specific, it gets very specific, and a lot of like the charged moments are fueled by like them being a vampire, them being a werewolf specifically, not just like, oh, like I'm attracted to you, like, you know what I mean? It's specific werewolf vampire stuff going on here. And like, maybe some people will be like, oh man, I wish I was a vampire after this one. Me personally, I'm like, okay, we could end it. That's especially towards the end. Like, it gets like, there's this one scene probably like 80% in where it's just like, oh my God, get me out of here. Okay. That being said, I think it closes up itself nicely. And another negative too, just before I wrap this up, like all romance stories, there is like kind of like the structure of a romance, like we hate each other, we love, like kind of like the enemies to lovers. It kind of follows that trope. And then there's the part where they have like the disagreement right before like the final act. I thought that was extremely weak. Luckily, it's not a big part of it. However, I just think like one of the most frustrating things I think for a lot of readers is like miscommunication plots. And it's almost that. It's almost sloppy that way, where it's like, oh, really, the characters are gonna break up because of miscommunication. Something like that happens, which was frustrating to me. But I would say overall, it didn't detract from the story that much. But it was like borderline sloppy writing there. So I was a little afraid after that it would just be like the classic rom-com arc where it's like disagreement, quick recovery of the relationship, mystery solved, happy ending. But I would say after that point, the mystery really did kick up. There was enough twists and turns to keep me engaged. And that's really just the case with the entire book. I felt like whenever the romance faltered for me, the plot and the intrigue kind of stepped up, and kind of vice versa too. When the investigation mystery of it kind of got stale, the romance took an interesting turn, which I was constantly engaged the whole time. So overall, probably one of my most favorite romancy books that I've read recently. Really entertaining, solidly written. I could have done with a little bit of less spice, but that's a personal preference. I know people literally eat that stuff up. Maybe not literally. That'd be kind of weird if you did. But if you like Ali Hazelwood, I don't think you'll be disappointed by this book, even though I haven't read any other books. I just think it's really well written. And if you're a fan of just fantasy romance, I feel like a lot of people will be entertained by this. I wouldn't be surprised if this book blew up in popularity, because it is so solidly written, and I feel like checks a lot of people's boxes. And it was kind of fun to be in it on the ground floor. I hope this book does really well, because now I feel like I'm invested in its success. But that's all I got for you guys. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like the video and you want to see more like it in the future. And as always, thanks for sticking around.